When I was working briefly as a journalist in California, Sean, you're from California, I felt this pressure to achieve something as a reporter. When I worked in the corporate world, I felt pressure to do something big outside myself. And even as a pastor, and this may come as a surprise to you, it won't come as a surprise to Pete and Jerry or Rich, but here's a confession. I want to be faithful, but I also want to be successful. I want to make something of my ministry. I want to love God, but I also want to be approved by people. And so I see this wrestle within me, this kind of battle. But it's not just unique to me or to people living in New York. I think this is part of human nature. And we see this in Scripture, this battle of our natures, even before the sin virus came into the world. There's this guy named Rabbi Joseph Solzhenitsyn, who wrote a fascinating book called The Lonely Man of Faith. And in this book, Rabbi Solzhenitsyn argues that in the book of Genesis, the very first book of the Bible, there seem to be two different portrayals of Adam that correspond to the two different sides of our nature. And Solzhenitsyn argues that these two different portrayals of Adam correspond to Genesis 1 and then Genesis 2. So let me explain. Solzhenitsyn points out that in Genesis 1, we see what he describes as, quote, Adam number one. Adam number one is driven, according to Genesis 1:28, to fill the earth and subdue it. So Adam number one has this drive to conquer, to create, to control, to calculate, and compete. Adam number one wants to understand how the world works so that he can create businesses, so that he can conquer diseases, so that he can control his environment. Now, Solzhenitsyn points out that Adam number one isn't bad. We all need some of Adam number one to get things done in the world. And some of you identify with Adam number one, as does Maureen, as you were saying earlier at our table. But then Solzhenitsyn points out that Genesis 2 seems to offer a different portrayal of Adam. In Genesis 2, we see what Solzhenitsyn describes as Adam number 2. And this Adam seems to have a different persona. Adam number 2 is led to a garden and is called to humbly serve it. Adam number 1 is interested in understanding how nature works in order to conquer and control it. Adam number 2 is not so much interested in the question, how does nature work? But rather, why is nature here in the first place? Adam number 2 is keenly interested in the meaning of life. Adam number 2 walks with God in the cool of the day. Adam number 2 is interested in relationship with God and with people. And I know that we could maybe question some of the exegesis that Solzhenitsyn is putting forward. But as you look at your own heart, isn't it true that you have something of Adam number 1 in you, this desire to be successful and productive and get things done in the world? But isn't it also true that you also have this part of you that corresponds to Adam number 2? You want to discover the meaning of life and to connect with God and people. Some of you relate more to Adam number 1, like Maureen, and others, like Donna, perhaps more to Adam number 2. Rabbi Solzhenitsyn argued that in the 1950s when he was writing, so this is like 50 years ago, actually it was in the 1960s, but about 50 years ago, that in the United States of America, Adam number 1 was utterly dominating Adam number 2. And if that was true 50 years ago in the 1960s, how much truer would that be of our society today? Now, I know that New Life is a place that cultivates Adam number 2, but our society at large, especially in New York, is dominated by Adam number 1. And this is true for people at a very young age, even in places that are more laid back than New York City, like Vancouver. We've got a son, as I mentioned, who is now 6 years old. He's in the first grade. When Joey was 4 years old, in preschool, his principal at that preschool really wanted Joey to be admitted to an elite private elementary school. And so this principal, and we love her, I don't want to throw her under the bus, so to speak, but she knew that I was a pastor. And so she said, Ken, I think we should get a photograph of Joey. Remember, he's 4 years old, at your homeless shelter ministry, feeding the homeless. I'm like, I don't think so. I can't persuade Joey to share his ice cream with me. How am I going to get him to, it's not going to be, that's not going to be real. But her motives were good. But, students from a young age can feel the pressure to get into the right schools. We can feel the pressure of Adam number 1 to be productive and successful in our work lives. Take, for example, Steve Jobs. A lot of people continue to talk about him. I admire the contributions that Jobs and Apple has made to the world, especially as one who used to work for the Sony Corporation, a company which in its heyday was very committed to being a pioneer in the field of electronics. And Steve Jobs, I think, had some of Adam number 2 inside him, but he seemed to be dominated, according to his official biographer, Walter Isaacson, by Adam number 1. Steve Jobs would not remember the anniversary of his wife, or her birthday, or the birthdays of his kids. Jobs would connect with publications like Fortune, Business Week, and Newsweek, and he would tell them that if you will put me on your front cover and my latest product, I will give you an exclusive story. But he was telling them all this at the same time, And so, when all the stories would come out at roughly the same time, obviously the publishers were kind of disappointed. And then, famously, when Jobs was taking Apple public, he cut out the founders. He didn't give some of the founders a share in the stock, like Chris Espinoza, Dan Kotke, Randy Wigington, and Bill Fernandez. Not the Bill Fernandez that spoke here, but a different one. I know you had a Will Fernandez here recently. And so Adam number 1 can dominate our lives as students, as people working, and then in terms of how we pour enormous amounts of resources into our bodies and our appearances. The late professor of political philosophy, Alan Bloom, once said, we have powerful images of what a perfect body is and pursue it incessantly. But we no longer have any image of what a perfect soul looks like, and hence do not long to have one. We do not even imagine there is such a thing. How do we cultivate Adam number 2 in a world dominated by Adam number 1? I know that this is what you're about, and you're leaders. You're the heart of New Life Fellowship. So think about it for you, but also as you encourage others in this very busy society that we live in. How do we do that? And why would we want to do that? Well, I think in cultivating Adam number 2, we develop a richer inner life and a more truly life-transformative relationship with God. And if Adam number 1 dominates our lives or the lives of our family and friends, we'll simply be less happy. Sean Achor is a psychologist who teaches at Harvard, and he points out that our brain regularly mispredicts what will bring us happiness. It regularly mispredicts what will bring us happiness. And he points out that many people operate on an if-then mentality. If I achieve this, then I'll be happy. If I get into the right school, then I'll be happy. If I get the right partner, then I'll be happy. If I find a beautiful home, then I'll be happy. If I become vice president, then I'll be happy. Sean Achor points out that the research does not bear this out, because when we achieve the goal, when we get into the school, our brain moves the goalposts further out. Then it becomes, how do I get better grades or get into a better school? Or I get into a beautiful house. The brain shifts the goalposts. How do I get a bigger and more beautiful house? And so the irony is that success doesn't lead to happiness. But the reverse is true. When we are happy and content and truly joyful, we tend to be more successful, or we would use the word more fruitful. And it's in the cultivation of Adam, number 2, that we become more joyful and more fruitful in our relationship with God and in our service. And this is what you're all about. So let me describe how I feel we can cultivate more of Adam, number 2. The first one, this will be no surprise to you, given who you are at New Life, but it's to have a living encounter with Jesus Christ, a truly living relationship with him that changes everything, as Rich was talking about, to have him in our lives. As is true when an oboe player in an orchestra plays the right note, and all the other musicians are able to adjust their instruments to that right note. Or when the sun is in the center of our solar system, enabling all the other planets to rotate on their proper trajectory. So when Jesus Christ is at the center of our solar system, of our heart, of our Kardia, then all of our desires begin to align in the right direction, the right arc. And this isn't just theory. I've seen this in my own mother. I've had a front row view. My mom was born and raised in Japan in the years following the war, when Japan was utterly impoverished and decimated. Through a remarkable turn of events, she was able to come to the United States to pursue an education when hardly anyone from Japan was coming to America. She earned her BA at the University of California at Berkeley, and then came here to New York City and got a master's degree at Columbia. That's why we've got a connection to New York City as a family. Then she went on to England to pursue further studies at Cambridge. When my mom was parenting me, she became very anxious because I showed zero interest in studies. I would have been diagnosed, they didn't have this diagnosis back when I was a kid, but I'm sure I would have been diagnosed with ADD or ADHD or something along those lines. But it stressed my mom out. The only thing I loved doing was playing hockey. Eh? It's the Canadian religion, you know? We ought to be Christian, but we bow at the altar of hockey. And so my mom, who's, pretty practically minded, made a deal with me. She said, Ken, I know you want to play hockey on the street in the cul-de-sac in front of our home. If you will write a one-page book report, I'll let you play. So that was the deal every day. And so I would literally be looking out the window, bawling my eyes out with a book while all the other kids were playing street hockey. I'd write my book report and I'd be able to go out. Now, as I look back, I think my book reports, I think they were pretty good, or maybe consistent would be a more accurate term, or identical, even more accurate. My book report was simply title of the book, comma, it was a pretty good book. You're wondering, how do you get a one-page book report from that? Big, fat Sharpie. That wasn't really working, so my mom kind of upped the ante. She really knew that I wanted to play ice hockey, but ice hockey is expensive in terms of the equipment. And the practices are really early. And so my mom said, and I was a straight D student. My mom said, if you become a straight A student, I'll let you play ice hockey. I became a straight A student. I started playing ice hockey, and then I dropped back to being a straight D student. My mom had a powerful encounter with Jesus Christ when I was a teenager. And all of her sort of worldly ambitions for her children, for her 5 children, I being one of them, seemed to fall away. And my sister at their, 50th? 50th anniversary. 50th anniversary celebration, my younger sister stood up and said, when I was in junior high, I remember my mom, and my sister now is a professor at the University of California, Riverside. My sister said, I remember Mom saying to me when I was in junior high, it's more important to be kind than to get good grades. More important to be loving than to be an academic success. And so God had really transformed her life. And so many Asians are just too wrapped up in where you go to school and what kind of profession you have. And my mom was transformed by the gospel in terms of her values. And that's what Christ can do to us, for us, and in us. But as A.W. Tozer pointed out, knowing Christ isn't just a matter of shaking your hand and saying, hi, Kizinga, I'm Ken. But it involves going deeper in that relationship, as you stress here at New Life. And it can take a lifetime. I can meet Kizinga and Roshan in a moment, but it would take a lifetime to really get to know you well. And so it is with Jesus Christ. It takes a lifetime to grow deeper in that relationship. And the way that we cultivate more of Adam number 2 and more of that relationship with Christ is, as you value here at New Life, I believe one of the ways is through the ancient classical spiritual practices. So I want to talk about 3 practices that help us cultivate more of this Adam number 2, this relationship with God and others, especially in a place like New York. And so the first practice I want to talk about, and I know that... okay, thanks.
See if I can do anything here. I don't know. Make it less... Does that feel any better?
That's okay.
Maybe if we...
Do you want to stand up for a second and you can stretch if you want, or you okay? Okay,
does that feel any better?
Okay, yeah. Good, that's good, thanks. The first thing I want to talk about, I know this is New Life Fellowship, is Sabbath. It's something that you emphasize a lot. Now, I want to frame this just slightly differently, and I want you to think about the shark for a moment. Sharks are beautiful but dangerous creatures. Here is a tiger shark, and I want this tiger shark to represent the beautiful but dangerous shark of busyness in our world. Being busy is alluring and attractive in some ways, is it not? Especially in a place like New York, but being busy is also dangerous. As I'm sure Pete has said before, quoting Thomas Merton, the most pervasive form of violence in our modern culture. It's Thomas Merton speaking, more than 50 years ago. Is not guns, is not, violence, psychological violence or physical violence, but it's busyness. It's busyness. Think about it. What is stress anyway? Isn't stress this feeling that I have more to do than I have time to do? And that's stress, and stress kills us. Why do men live, fewer years than women? 2 or 3 years less on average in North America. Why do women live more years than men? I think it's because for many men, Adam number 1 is more in dominance, and we feel like we've got to get more done. We need to accomplish more. We don't feel like we have enough time. Stress kills. And so Sabbath can be a great antidote to the shark of busyness. And to come back to the image of Louis Zamperini, what did the man from Honolulu say to him? If you're faced with a shark coming toward you, what do? Yeah, you bare your teeth, make a threatening expression, and stiff arm the shark. A relatively simple action. So remember that next time you're attacked by a shark underwater, okay? Remember that. This is important. This is news you can use. Yeah, it may not work, but I'm not taking any responsibility legally for that. But yeah, if the shark's coming toward you, it might work. So just make sure you hit him good. Boom. But a relatively simple action can arrest a shark. underwater and perhaps on a train as well. And so it is in our spiritual lives. When we face the sharks in our society, whether it's busyness or other things, a relatively simple practice can arrest that shark. And one of those relatively simple practices is Sabbath that Pete has spoken so articulately about, as has Jerry. Now, often Sabbath is this invitation to rest, and it obviously is, as you have on your rule of life. But Sabbath is also an invitation to trust God. Remember when Moses led his people out of Egypt, where they had been slaves for hundreds of years, through the wilderness en route to the promised land. They were going through the wilderness, and what did God provide them with? What was the name of the food? Manna. And do you recall what manna meant? Yeah, it was a wafer. It wasn't a bagel, but when they looked at it, they simply said, "What is it?" So that's what manna literally means. What is it? And manna was not only this golden, honey-flavored wafer, but it was an opportunity for people to learn to trust God. So God said to collect enough manna for how long? 1 day. And what would happen if they tried to hoard the manna? Yeah, it'd be infested with maggots. It would rot, like some of our jack-o'-lanterns are probably this morning, It would rot. And so God was teaching his people to trust him each day with food. But then on the eve of the Sabbath, how much manna were they allowed to collect? 2 days' worth. And what happened to the manna, miraculously? It stayed fresh. And God said, don't go looking for manna on the Sabbath. Don't work. But nonetheless, of course, humans being humans, people would go out and look for manna. God was teaching his people to trust him through manna, even before they had the Ten Commandments. Okay? I've got a friend named Ben who was part of Microsoft before Microsoft became famous, before it went public. And Ben told me that when he started working at Microsoft, his manager said to him, "I expect you to work 80 hours a week. I don't care how you put in those hours, but put them in." Ben said, he's Asian. Asians cannot say no. He said, yes. Then he went home and talked to his wife, Mei Ling, and they were starting to have a family. Ended up having 4 kids. Mei Ling said, no, can't do this. It's going to wreck our family. And so they agreed together that Ben would limit his work week to 40 hours a week, except during crunch time. He went to his manager, kind of sheepishly, and said, "I can only work 40 hours a week." His manager said, "It's going to hurt your career. It's going to hurt your career. You're going to have trouble advancing here." And there was a part of Ben that felt relieved, but also a part of him that felt kind of conflicted because he wanted to be considered an insider in the company. But he and Mei Ling prayed that God would provide through them at 40 hours a week. Ben went on to become the leader of Windows 95, Windows 98, Windows 2000. Did really well. God provided for him. Now, the point of this is not to say that if you honor the Sabbath, you're going to be really rich and successful, okay? If you are, you can support New Life and EHS generously. Of course, but that's not the point. But the point is, when you honor Sabbath, you can trust that God will provide all that you need. I'm a preacher, and I'm sure some of you teach because you're leaders here, and maybe Rich can relate to this, and Pete. As we were talking last night, I was invited earlier this year to speak to the Pentecostal National Assembly of Canada, to all the pastors, at their national gathering. And I had received an email and explaining things, and then several days before, I double-checked the email. I thought I was only giving one keynote address. But as I read the email carefully, they were asking me to give 2 addresses. And one was an address that I had never given before on a very specific subject. And I'm like, I have no time to really prepare for this. The only time I have to prepare for this is on my Sabbath day. And, Rich mentioned the Pentecostal preacher earlier. If you're Pentecostal, this does not represent a problem for you. Because you just stand up if you're Pentecostal, right? And you just wait for the Spirit to fall on you. And you get the word of the Lord. But I'm not that anointed. I have to prepare. I have to invite Jesus into the party, but I have to prepare too. But I felt God was calling me to trust him. And for some of us here, I know you've heard about Sabbath, but Sabbath is an invitation to trust God for your ministry. because it's not all riding on your shoulders, okay? So the shark of busyness can be stiff-armed in the water or on the train, so to speak, by Sabbath. There's another shark in our world that's also alluring and beautiful in many ways, and it's the shark of noise. And this is a hammerhead shark right here. Let's go to the next one. So, yeah. As I was flying over here, there was a guy next to me with a big, the earphones, and I could hear the music really loudly through the earphones, Noise is a beautiful, alluring shark here in Queens, in New York City. Is that not true? Some people want noise on all the time. They want the TV on all the time. And one of the ways to combat this, to stiff arm the shark of noise, is silent meditation. I know that silent meditation sounds flaky to a lot of people and weird, but it can have a powerful effect in our hearts, making us more receptive to the living God and God's presence in every other part of our life. As I mentioned earlier, I am very, very easily distracted. I feel like there are, 1,010 chimpanzees in my head at any moment, often. And so what I typically do at some point in the morning is I find a place to sit, and I simply take some time to breathe deeply. And then I start thinking, how much time has passed? So I set the timer on my watch, so maybe as little as 10 or 15 minutes, maybe 20. So easily distracted that I'll reach for the Bible and maybe just use a simple word like wait from Isaiah 40 or from the Gospels. The Gospel of John, where the blind guy says, Jesus, have mercy on me, a sinner. Jesus, have mercy on me, a sinner. The alarm goes off, and afterwards I usually feel just a little bit more relaxed, and throughout the day just a bit more focused and a little bit more conscious of Jesus. I was talking to a single father recently. He's a senior consultant, busy guy, got 2 kids, Tildy age 11, Sammy age 8, single father, has to travel a lot. He tries to stretch in the morning for about 10 minutes and tries to meditate for about 10 minutes. Doesn't do it every day. But I said, does it make any difference? And he said, yeah, God shows up more when I meditate. God is with you all the time. God doesn't show up more, but you simply become more aware of God. I'm from Vancouver, as I mentioned. I love to sail. I don't have a sailboat. Several weeks ago, I think it was like in September, someone emailed me on Sunday afternoon and said, I'm on Salt Spring Island, which is an island off of Vancouver Island, and there's a body of water, a strait between Vancouver Island and Vancouver. So he's on this island, and he says, can you help me sail my boat back to Vancouver? He's got a 50-foot yacht, and so it's a big boat. And I said, I'm thinking, I'd love to, but I've got to speak at the evening service. I'm not going to get home till 10 p.m. Check the ferries. No ferry going that late to this little island off of Vancouver. And I check, and there's a float plane that's leaving the Vancouver harbor early in the morning. So I fly out in a little, twin-engine float plane. I land, and we get in his boat. We sail it out of the harbor. And my friend Howard looks at me and says, Ken, you busy today? Because we could either power across the strait in a couple of hours or take 4 or 5 or 6 hours to sail across. I'm like, it's my day off. Why don't we sail? So what happened? Well, we saw some empty Coke cans and some plastic, because there's always debris everywhere, near cities. But we also ended up seeing 4 whales. We saw a bunch of seals, countless salmon jumping as it was the season. And then this guy has sailed for decades, and all these birds landed on the yacht. He said, I'd never seen anything like this before. He said, it must be because you're a pastor. He thought I was like St. Francis of Assisi, although he doesn't know who he is, but he thought I was having that effect. It wasn't me. But that's a kind of metaphor for me for meditation. Sometimes when I'm in the quiet, this garbage comes up. The empty Coke can, the debris, the plastic bags, the sin of my own heart, my anxieties. And so I lift it up to God in prayer. But often I just sense the quiet beauty of God, Him holding me and the beauty of His love. It is a gift. It's not a have to, it's a get to. Silent meditation, a way to stiff arm the shark of noise. Sabbath, silent meditation. And then thirdly, especially in New York, maybe this is the world capital, but there is the shark of power. And this is a great white shark here. Great white shark. Power. Power is so attractive, so alluring, and obviously can be used for good, but it can be damaging as well. And the way to stiff arm the shark of power is through servanthood. And Rich has been talking about that, and this is what you guys are about. But let me read something by a guy named Andy Crouch. He's a Christian journalist. And he writes about this in a book called Playing God, Redeeming the Gift of Power. He's a former InterVarsity person like Pete and Jerry. Crouch describes how in his work, he's often called away to speak. And as you know, if you travel in your line of work, often just before a trip, that's the busiest time, right? You're just getting together last-minute details. And he says, for many years, my work has taken me away from home several times a month, and the hours preceding a trip are often consumed with last-minute preparations for meetings or speaking engagements. And he says, the last thing on my mind is the mundane maintenance of our family life that will have to continue along the way. And he says, while I am often treated with absurd courtesy and being showered with the accoutrements of power, the wireless microphones, and the gracious people like Jerry who helped to readjust them, that amplify my voice, and the gracious introductions like Rich's that amplify my accomplishments, the always polite and frequently enthusiastic applause and welcome. I've never seen such a warm welcome ever as here. The meals out with old friends and new, there will still be dishes accumulating in my kitchen. In the last minutes before leaving for the airport, those dishes seem like the least important thing I could possibly do, which is exactly why one of my personal disciplines is, whenever possible, to do them all before I leave. Many times I have torn myself away from revising a talk or tweaking a set of presentation slides to plunge my hands into hot, soapy water and deal with the dishes from last night, or to be honest, last week's dinner. He says, doing dishes on the deadline more than once while the taxi waits outside our house challenges my zero-sum calculus opportunity. It helps put calculating atom number one in his place. And the honest truth, Andy says, is not once have I ever felt any reason to regret my time serving my family in this way. Whereas more than once, having left a sink of full dishes behind in self-imposed hurry, I have been haunted by regret and the painful awareness of how little I trust God and how thin is my love for my family. So that's Andy's practice. I'm not saying you need to do the dishes all the time, but I think it's a beautiful picture. The sharks, busyness, noise, power can be arrested through Sabbath honoring, silent meditation, and servitude. Let me close by reflecting on two very influential women at the end of the 20th century, Lady Diana and Mother Teresa. Their lives were often compared because they died within a week of each other and because they were so well known. Now, Lady Diana, I believe, had quite a bit of Adam number 2 in her soul. That showed up especially at the end of her life as she was very committed to removing the scourge of landmines and serving vulnerable kids. So lots of Adam 2. But according to her biographer, Tina Brown, there was also plenty of Adam number one in her. Lady Di had this real self-absorption and this never-ending calculation about how she could manage her image so as to be able to guard her power through the celebrity press. And as one journalist put it, very few of us can achieve the kind of celebrity that Diana achieved. First of all, very few people can be born or to be married into a royal family. So you've got to be born in or married into a royal family, right? We know that. This journalist also points out that there are just a tiny number of people in the world that can have such a magnetic grip on every single, television camera and paparazzi camera in the world as Lady Di had. And this journalist also points out that, even if we had millions of dollars, most of us could never, for all the plastic surgery in the world, could not look like Lady Di in her prime. Most of us couldn't, right? However, there is nothing that would keep us from being like Mother Teresa in every essential way. On this very day, there are hundreds of people volunteering with the Sisters of Charity in Calcutta. Most of them will not be as famous as Mother Teresa, but in every other way, they're materially living her life, holding the hand of the dying, praying for the vulnerable. My wife, Sakiko, before she came to know the Lord, won a writing contest when she was in junior high in Japan. And the prize for that contest was the chance to meet Mother Teresa. And she said Mother Teresa was this beautiful woman. She doesn't have much fashion sense, especially by the standards of New York, but beautiful, radiant, and luminous. And, for all the money in the world, most of us could not look like Lady Di in her prime. But all of us could look like Mother Teresa, not in her dress, but in the luminosity of the Christ that shines through every wrinkle in our face as we get older. Why not? Most of us cannot achieve worldwide celebrity, which would be an Adam 1 desire, but every one of us here could become a saint, which is an Adam 2 desire. And that's why a friend of mine has said the only tragedy in life, really, is to not become a saint. It's the only tragedy. It's not a tragedy to have never lived in a large and luxurious home. It's not a tragedy to have never been able to vacation in a really exotic place or to have never been widely known. The only tragedy in life is to not become a saint, because every one of us, by the grace of God, could become a saint. And so my plea to you leaders here at New Life is to, yes, use Adam number 1. We need Adam number 1 to get things done around here. But to also cultivate Adam number 2. Not only to keep your soul safe in the shark-infested waters of New York, but so that you will become the saint that you were meant to be, the saint that Jesus Christ died for you to become. May it be so for you servants here at New Life. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.
What we're going to do for the next 15 minutes is we'll have maybe 1 or 2 minutes of some private reflection, and then we'll get into maybe at your table there for about 12, 13 minutes, and then we'll have a 15-minute break, okay? But here are 2 questions. I don't know if they're up there, but here are 2 questions to rest. Number 1, do you identify with Adam number 1 or Adam number 2? Who do you identify most with? And then in this season of your life, what stiff arm practices? I like that. I like that. And as Adelaide mentioned, can we do that on the subway? Yes, you can do that on the subway. What stiff arm practices might be helpful in this season to reflect a more redeemed Adam number 2 or Adam number 1 there? And so what stiff arm practices do you need right now? When you heard Ken speak, what do you sense Jesus calling you to? And why? And then we'll discuss that for about 10, 12 minutes. But take about 2-3 minutes to think about those two questions and then go right into your discussion, okay? I'm not gonna prompt you, just go right into your discussion after about 2 or 3 minutes. Just look at each other and say, okay, we're ready, all right? So I'll leave it up to you guys to take it there.